This presentation is provided to share background information for new local advisory committee members or new staff that are in counties with land and basins and watersheds under nutrient-sensitive waters or NSW designations, which have nutrient control strategies. In the first half, I'll be sharing necessary background information about the strategies and the results from crop year 2024 agricultural reporting on nutrients, which is the last crop year that we've completed reporting on. And in the second half, I'll be sharing updates on nutrient-related rulemaking revisions that will impact the agriculture sector in these basins and watersheds under existing strategies. It's important to be aware of the water quality regulatory activity happening across the state because this activity can significantly impact agricultural producers and can help Soil and Water Conservation Partnership be better positioned to respond to nutrients water quality issues and assist producers to meet upcoming requirements. Nutrient-sensitive waters management strategies, or NSW strategies, are a group of administrative rules that the Department of Environmental Quality puts into place at one time. NSW strategies are the mitigation option that DEQ has chosen for cases of water bodies in North Carolina not meeting state chlorophyll A water quality standards, especially for major water bodies. Chlorophyll A is a proxy measure for the enrichment of nutrients in surface waters. Under the Federal Clean Water Act, the state of North Carolina is required to take regulatory action to maintain and restore the chemical, physical, and biological integrity of the state's waters. By taking the NSW strategy approach, the state puts regulations in place to deal with point and non-point sources of pollution, which are all contributing to the nutrient-related issues and reservoirs and estuaries that we see in the state. Common components of the administrative rule package that make up an NSW strategy include rules addressing stormwater from new development and existing development, rules addressing non-point source contributions from agricultural lands, and rules addressing the discharge effluent limits from wastewater dischargers. Another common strategy component is a buffer rule, which requires riparian establishment along surface waters when there's a land use change, like cropland to homes. What we're focused on for this portion of the presentation is the agriculture rule. And let's dive in. North Carolina has 4 existing NSW strategies that are all in the eastern and central part of the state. Although an NSW strategy is under development in the western part of the state in the Yadkin PD River Basin, I will not be covering aspects of that strategy in this presentation today. All of the existing strategies require an annual report on agriculture's collective activity to reduce nitrogen losses and phosphorus loss risk from agricultural land. If agriculture did not complete these reports or did not demonstrate achievement in reducing nitrogen and phosphorus losses from ag land, producers in each of these watersheds and basins could face additional regulation, like implementation of required agricultural practices or other costly requirements. The oldest NSW strategy in the state is the Neuse strategy, which was designed to reduce nutrient loading to the Neuse estuary. The agriculture rule that was part of the strategy became effective in 1997 and was mostly recently readopted in 2020. The baseline for this strategy is average conditions in the early 1990s, and the agriculture sector is required to show annually that it has reduced nitrogen losses from cropland by 30% from the baseline period. Currently, there is no revision or readoption regulatory activity happening within the Neuse NSW strategy. The second oldest NSW strategy is the Tarp-Pamlico NSW strategy, which again was designed to reduce nutrient loading to the Tarp-Pamlico estuary. The ag rule that was part of this strategy became effective in 2001 and was also recently readopted in 2020. The baseline period for this strategy is 1991. Similar to the Neuse, the agriculture sector is required to show annually that it has reduced nitrogen losses from cropland by 30% from the baseline period. For the Tarp-Pamlico strategy, agriculture must also demonstrate that there has not been an increase in phosphorus loss risk from agricultural lands in the basin from the baseline period. It was the first strategy in the state to include phosphorus-related criteria, and there's currently no revision or readoption regulatory activity occurring within the Tarp-Pamlico strategy. The first NSW strategy in the state for a freshwater drinking reservoir was the Jordan Lake watershed, which is in the headwaters of the Cape Fear River Basin. This strategy and the ag rule included in it was set up differently than the others. Reduction goals for nitrogen and phosphorus were set by subwatershed, and reductions had to be demonstrated on both cropland and pastureland. The baseline period for the Jordan Lake strategy was set to be average conditions in the late 1990s to the early 2000s, and the rule became effective in 2009. The Jordan Lake NSW strategy is actively undergoing revision and readoption. The last existing NSW strategy in the state, also for a freshwater drinking reservoir, was the Falls Lake watershed, which is in the headwaters of the Neuse Basin. The Falls Lake watershed already had to comply with Neuse Basin NSW requirements, but additional reductions were determined to be needed. This rule became effective in 2011, and reductions were to be measured against the baseline year of 2006. Similar to the Jordan Lake strategy, reduction goals were set for nitrogen and phosphorus and had to be demonstrated on both cropland and pasture land. Unlike the other strategies, the Falls Lake strategy staged reduction requirements by years. Stage 2 of the Falls Lake strategy has been paused by legislative action, and the Falls Lake strategy is currently undergoing revision and readoption. As mentioned in the previous slides, all existing strategies and ag rules require an annual report on agriculture's collective activity to reduce nitrogen losses and phosphorus loss risk from agricultural land. For the Neuse and Tar Pamlico and Falls Lake ag rules, the reporting process proceeds as is shown on this slide. Local information and data is collected and reviewed by local advisory committees, or LACs for short, for the 25 counties under the Neuse, Tar Pamlico, and Falls Lake strategies. LAC representation includes DSWC staff, NRCS local field staff, district staff or supervisors, cooperative extension staff, Department of Agriculture staff, which is typically the regional agronomist covering the county, and at least 2 agriculture producers who are also county residents. Local information is reviewed and approved by each LAC. It's then sent to the Division of Soil and Water Conservation, and then it's analyzed and summarized within annual progress reports that is then reviewed by each strategy's oversight committee. The exception to this process is for the Jordan Lake watershed, which does not have formalized local advisory committees, but local staff are contacted annually to review and report data. Membership on oversight committees includes a Division of Soil and Water Conservation rep, an NRCS rep, a Department of Ag rep, a Cooperative Extension rep, a Division of Water Resources representative from DEQ, 3 to 4 agriculture interest or farmer seats, in addition to 2 to 3 environmental interest seats. Oversight committees developed the accounting methods that we use to track and report on agricultural activity to reduce nitrogen losses and phosphorus loss risk from agricultural lands, and those methods are approved by the DEQ's Environmental Management Commission. After the oversight committees review and approve each basin and watershed annual report, the report is submitted to staff in the Division of Water Resources with the Department of Environmental Quality. And annual reports to demonstrate the agriculture sector's collective progress in each basin and watershed to achieve set nitrogen and phosphorus load reductions. We collect, review, and incorporate a lot of different agricultural data. Data we include in annual reports is listed on this slide and includes data from the Farm Service Agency, National Agriculture Statistics Service, state and federal conservation cost share programs, along with local information on fertilization rates, nutrient reducing BS management practice implementation that is not supported with cost share funding, and other resources as they become available. In our current reporting process, we rely on local knowledge and expertise to make sure local data, along with state and federal data from various databases, is accurate. A big thank you to all local advisory committee members, including district staff and supervisors, who contribute to our annual reporting efforts. When the Neuse agriculture rule was being drafted, the ag community was grappling with how reduction of non-point source nitrogen losses from the sector could be measured and to demonstrate progress in meeting the reduction targets set in rule. The basin and watershed nitrogen tracking methodology ultimately developed was an easy-to-use tool called the Aggregate Nitrogen Loss Estimation Worksheet Tool, or NLEW for short. This tool was initially developed for the Neuse agriculture rule, and the years since its use has been expanded to conduct nitrogen loss accounting in all the watersheds and basins with agriculture rules in North Carolina. This tool assumes a majority of nitrogen loss in a North Carolina cropping system, moves a soluble nitrogen through the soil system to the shallow groundwater. It estimates a baseline nitrogen loss for agriculture. It captures inorganic and animal waste fertilizer application, tracks nitrogen reducing best management practice implementation that has an impact on soluble nitrogen movement through the soil system and groundwater, and it tracks changes in nitrogen losses at a whole county scale adjusted for acreage in the basin or watershed. And the annual nitrogen reduction accounting that is completed at the basin and watershed level through the Aggregate NLEW tool, we do not report every crop that is grown in the counties. The NLEW tool was set up to capture information about the largest agricultural commodity crops grown in basins and watersheds. Those crops are listed on this slide. In Aggregate NLEW, we can only report certain BMPs for credit in reducing nitrogen from agricultural cropland and pastureland. Since most nitrogen that leaves North Carolina cropping systems moves as soluble nitrogen through the shallow groundwater, the only BMPs that are reported for credit in reducing nitrogen are those that impact the soluble nitrogen movement from agricultural land. Those practices are shown in the green box on the slide, which are unfertilized, unharvested cover crops for the species listed, riparian buffers, which include filter strips and field borders that are directly adjacent to a blue line water body, water control structures that are under active water quality maintenance agreements or structures out of contract that have passed field inspection, and livestock exclusion systems with associated setbacks for Falls Lake and Jordan Lake accounting only. And that's because Falls Lake and Jordan Lake are the only watersheds with pasture-specific reporting requirements. For water control structures, note that we can only report structures under active contract with water quality maintenance agreements intact. We can also include structures out of contract that have passed field inspections and were determined to be maintained in a way to realize nitrogen reduction benefits. And annual reports both the total affected acres by structures under active contract as well as cumulatively contracted totals are included. There are additional practices that are implemented through conservation programs that may have nitrogen reduction benefits that the agriculture sector does not receive credit for in the NLEW tool. These are listed in the red box on the slide and include diversions, precision agriculture, sod-based rotation, tillage management, and others. These practices primarily serve to reduce nutrient losses by preventing erosion, and the nitrogen loss estimation tool serves to capture practices that have the greatest impact on reducing soluble nitrogen flow through the shallow groundwater. We do still include cumulative and active contract totals for these practices in annual reports, but some practices are also included in our qualitative phosphorus loss tracking that we complete annually as well. For some of these practices that we submit for phosphorus loss tracking, that is because a lot of phosphorus loss is sediment bound. So reducing sediment erosion is also reducing phosphorus losses from these ag systems simultaneously as well. When the Tarpamlico agriculture rule was being drafted, the ag community was grappling with how reduction of non-point source phosphorus losses from ag land could be measured to demonstrate progress in meeting the no net increase target that was set in rule. The initial goal was to try and create an easy-to-use aggregate tool for tracking phosphorus losses, which was similar to the Aggregate NLEW tool that was developed for nitrogen tracking. A committee of technical representatives from state agencies and universities examined this issue and need, but ultimately concluded that a defensible, aggregated, county-scale accounting method for estimating phosphorus losses from ag lands could not be feasibly developed. This committee instead proposed that the ag sector qualitatively track the risk of phosphorus loss from ag lands by tracking several qualitative factors and comparing annual values against baseline conditions to determine yearly whether phosphorus loss risk is increasing or decreasing. This methodology in implementation does not yield a % reduction number annually like is calculated for nitrogen loss, but it does provide useful information about agricultural phosphorus loss trends. This qualitative tracking methodology has been adapted and adopted for use in the Falls Lake and the Jordan Lake watersheds, which also have phosphorus loss reduction targets for agriculture. These are the qualitative parameters we collect data on annually to complete comparisons between the current crop year and baseline conditions to determine whether there is an increased or decreased phosphorus loss risk from agricultural lands in the basins and watersheds with phosphorus no net increase or reduction targets. Water control structures affected acres are tabulated only for the Tar-Pamlico Basin, and tobacco acres are only tabulated for the Falls Lake and Jordan Lake watersheds. This spring, we concluded crop year 2024 annual reporting, and reports from the latest cycle are posted to the Division of Soil and Water Conservation's Watershed Initiative web pages. In crop year 2024, approximately 2.1 million Ag Cost Share Program dollars and 8.6 million EQIP dollars were estimated to have been spent in NSW watersheds and basins. Nitrogen load tracking in crop year 2024 shows the agriculture sector is largely meeting and largely exceeding all the nitrogen reduction goals set for ag in each of these different basins, according to our current tracking and reporting methodology. So this first reduction for crop year 2024 that was calculated, that's listed on this slide, is for Falls Lake. The next is for the Neuse Basin, about a 50% N reduction that we've seen since the baseline year. 52%, sorry, that was for the Tar-Pamlico Basin. 52% is for the Neuse here. And for the Jordan Lake watershed, as of crop year 2023, we've seen significant reductions that exceed the reduction requirements for nitrogen that are set in rule for cropland, as well as for pasture. For the Jordan, there is a little bit more of a unique situation in that we've had data availability issues for the methodology tracking that is set in place for that watershed. It does follow a different tracking and methodology procedure than is set for the Neuse and the Tar-Pamlico basins. And so it's been difficult to draw comparisons for crop year 2024 results to the baseline in Jordan since we have more limited data. These crop year 2023 and 2022 results for crop and pasture for Jordan were calculated using USDA census data, which is only available every 5 years. We saw in crop year 2024 that there is a reduced phosphorus loss risk for most of the parameters that are monitored in comparison to baseline periods for every strategy as well. So again, lots of cost share dollars spent for the Tar-Pamlico Basin, which has a no net increase requirement. We saw less phosphorus loss risk for 6 of the 9 tracked parameters, less phosphorus loss risk for 7 out of the 8 parameters for Falls Lake, less phosphorus loss risk for 4 out of the 8 parameters for Jordan Lake, but we didn't have any additional updated data for 2 of them due to data reporting changes happening at the USDA level for the National Agriculture Statistics Service. So it could have been closer to 6 out of 8 for Jordan if we had updated data. All right. Now is the second half of my presentation where I'll share updates on NSW rulemaking in the state. So the Jordan Lake strategy is up for readoption and revision. Stakeholder groups met and provided feedback on draft rule language to date. Jordan Lake One Water, or JLO for short, is a coalition group that includes local governments, municipalities, corporate stakeholders, along with Soil and Water Conservation District and farmer advocacy stakeholders. That group is also meeting concurrently to send recommendations to DWR on rule language and to advance an integrated watershed management framework. And by that, I mean essentially a set of rules that will allow sectors to work together collaboratively to reduce point and non-point source nutrient pollution instead of having to work in separate silos. One rule concept that I expect to be part of the strategy is an existing development rule that local governments will expect to be complying with by contributing investments to a funding pool that will be used to finance nutrient reduction projects across the watershed. The implication of this concept is that there could be additional funding made available to agricultural producers to further nutrient reduction BMP implementation on ag land in the watershed. We also expect a cattle exclusion rule to also be promulgated by the DWR, which would set collective targets for livestock exclusion system implementation. And we would also expect to see revised agriculture sector reporting requirements in the strategy update as well. Right now, I do not have an updated timeline to share on next steps with the Jordan Lake readoption process. Final rule drafts were sent out by the DWR last summer, and there's been some developments at the leadership level within Department of Environmental Quality that has delayed movement of the Jordan Lake strategy moving forward. So we don't currently have an updated timeline on when the DWR expects for updated regulations to go through the next phases of public comment and revision. So I will be sharing that information when it becomes available. The Falls Lake strategy is also up for readoption and revision. Stakeholder work groups are meeting and providing feedback on rule language that's being drafted currently. The Upper Neuse River Basin Association, which is a coalition group that mostly includes local governments, municipalities, but also has Soil and Water Conservation District and farmer advocacy reps as part of it as well, is largely driving the informal stakeholder process for the Falls watershed and the development of draft rule language as well. The UNRBA is similarly interested, like the JLO Coalition is, in breaking down silos to try and work collaboratively on reducing point and non-point source contributions to the Falls Lake Reservoir and within the watershed. For agriculture, we expect two rule concepts to impact the sector, which includes another existing development investment pool concept, as well as a revised agriculture sector reporting requirements. There's not additional requirements expected for the ag sector in the Falls Lake watershed because of the significant loss of agricultural land that we've seen in this watershed since reporting began. A new draft agricultural reporting rule was released earlier this year in 2026, and the DWR is accepting reviews and comments on that rule. I held a webinar on the current Falls Lake readoption process, where we are, statuses in February 2026. And I can send a recording of that webinar to anyone who wants to learn more details about where that process was in February. Unfortunately, again, Falls Lake is in a similar situation to the Jordan, where I don't really have an updated timeline on next steps with this process. So I can't comment on where we'll be next moving forward to with this in the next year. I expect that we will be moving forward with a public comment period, hopefully, but I don't have any information on specific months or timeframes that the DWR and DEQ are expecting for this. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to contact me. My office and cell number and email are listed on the slide. If you need more information, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm more than happy to chat about any of these items with you in greater detail. Thank you for your time. I hope you have a good rest of your day.